us for this special broadcast of the Women in Agriculture debate, moderated by CNBC Africa's Bronwyn Nielsen at the 52nd annual meetings of the African Development Bank in Ahmedabad, India. Now, the theme for the conference was Transforming Agriculture for Wealth Creation in Africa. For transformation to happen, we need to be able to picture the needs of the woman farmer, the smallholder in the remote areas of Africa, the woman who carries the baby on her back, who produces the food, who takes care of the family, and who is the custodian of the environment on which we all depend. Now, if Africa's agriculture sector is going to become a $1 trillion industry by the year 2030, and those are the forecasts that are being made, the question that we need to answer is, how does that smallholder farmer meaningfully participate in that significant economic growth story that could be Africa's agriculture future?
There are a couple of different topics that I would like to get you all to input on. And the first one, Florence, I think if you could kick off, giving us a sense of deploying technology, deploying science to increase production, to increase yields. And how, when we look at what Rima has just said in terms of creating viable enterprises, the first point is that you have to be able to produce more than just for your family. And then you're able to get that income going. So if that's a starting point, we'll talk about access to finance and expansion, but let's bring it right home to trying to increase the yield.
The issue of increasing yield is one which is a major bottleneck, I believe, in Asia and Africa. And certainly you have gone around it because it goes beyond just inputs to information, education, and deploying the research products that have been invested in globally for Africa through many international centers and even governments. There is a gap, there is a barrier, bottleneck of deploying research to the hands of the farmers. Most of you are familiar with the models in the West where professors spend half of their time in a lab or teaching, the other half are reaching out to the farmers. But these are very few farmers educated, highly mechanized, easy to reach. Whereas we are dealing with a large number of smallholder farmers who are really, and I can see why you've been successful. This is our project because they are getting to a group of villages clustering and doing that. And in Africa, and where I've been involved in several countries, and I can go back to any one of them and give a good example. We were able, for example, working with sorghum, to a tangible example, to raise productivity from half a ton per hectare. First, we doubled by just deploying certified high-yielding varieties that come from research. Let me an example, sorghum from ICRISAT and national institutions in Africa. ICRISAT is based here in India, in Hyderabad. Research has been done with national institutions, but never reached the farmers to the point that beyond testing to large scale up. And that had to go through, again, a channel of working with the private sector partners. That, again, investment, information, education, to good agronomy to increase productivity. So the high-yielding varieties, to unlock the genetics value, has to come with inputs. And that is why I agree completely with the president of African Development Bank. Agriculture must be seen as an investment. The way we invest in other things. You cannot get value out of agriculture without investment. That is key. And so really turning money into farming, it can't happen otherwise. To be able to deploy, there has to be resources come with information, with the private sector, even private sector being helped to deliver in Africa because it's a very...
So Florence, I actually want Jana to come in here because when you said investment and deploy that investment, Jana started nodding furiously. Yeah. So come in and basically elaborate on that investment aspect.
Sure, I'm happy to build on Florence's point because something Florence said at the beginning was so right, which is it's not just about the lack of access to inputs, it's inputs and capital and extension services and social forms of support. Speaking on this vital issue, which if you ever talk to President Adeshina on it, he will point out that one of the most egregious parts of the gender disparity in agriculture is how it translates into these yield gaps. Women produce 20 to 30% on average in sub-Saharan Africa less That's their yield gap, 20 to 30% less. Now, if we were to simply raise that so that men and women had equal productivity by virtue of access to financing and a range of other things, the estimates are that there would be 3 to 4% more agricultural output globally, and that's very theoretical and hard to translate. What it translates into is something on the order of 15 to 17% fewer people in this world undernourished. 100 to 150 million people no longer undernourished. So this gender disparity and how it translates into a productivity gap and yield gap is one of the most critical unmet needs for us to address.
And on the nutrition element, 58 million children below the age of 5 suffer from malnutrition in Africa. So we're going to build on that stat and the Feed the Africa theme that we are building on. You wanted to come back in, and then Ada, you want to take, Florence, do you want to pick up?
Yeah, read it.
Right in.
Again, building on that, I think that's a very, very good point we need to build on. Not only do we need to bring the resources, but we need to target the youth, because currently the farmer is getting older and is changing. So this huge resource that can be tapped with the women and with the youth, fortunately, even young men are actually taking interest in agriculture, because the problem had been agriculture being seen as something for the poor. And so the targeting of the neighbor youth kind of program, which looks at agriculture as a business, exciting, where you can really take your calculator and say, I'm going to grow this, at the end of it, I'll produce this, I'll make this money. That's getting very attractive. So again, that links up to this agro-entrepreneurship.
Ada.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of pick up on something Florence said regarding the higher yields through innovation and R&D for the seeds, the sorghum seeds that Ecosat here in Hyderabad was able to develop. And I remember a story that my former boss, Dr. Adeshino, used to tell me when he was a fellow and he was a researcher, and he was going around, I think it was Zambia or so, and he was with some sorghum farmers, and a guy was like, my gosh, look at your sorghum, it's all so high, it's amazing, your yields have increased. And the guy just looks at him with a very blank face. This is a sorghum farmer. And then shows him his storage, and he says, yeah, but you know anyone who wants to buy it? You know, so I cannot emphasize enough the fact that you need to link what we're doing with women farmers, increasing yields, whatever, to a market, to a processor who is going to buy it big time. And that's why I'm very passionate about processing. You brought up nutrition very quickly again, you know, rightly so, a lot of undernourished or overnourished or not having enough micronutrients, and yet these are women who are farming the majority of the food we eat, yet they're burdened with the issue of malnutrition. You know, you just can't even, we really need to talk about it so much more. And, you know, I think, was it Scaling Up Nutrition, SUN? They did research and they showed for every dollar spent on nutrition, dealing with the issue of malnutrition in farming and all of that, you get $16 more in returns. So there's money to be made if we start focusing more on the crops that make sense, so that these mothers, these women who are farming can feed their families right, so that the gray matter infrastructure we talk about, you know, that first 1,000 days when a kid's brain is forming. And very quickly, I'll just say how that is really affecting my business today. Because I think about how many times I repeat to my staff, you know, we talk about skills of youth in Africa, and we need to upskill a lot of our youths. And I'm trying to do that, hiring people, hiring young people. But I know sometimes I'm just like, oh, common sense isn't common. You know, I'm repeating the same things. I'm like, what's going on? Don't you get it? You know, I've said this like 5 times. Why don't you do it? And I had to take a step back and think of some of the backgrounds these folks came from. Or maybe if they grew up in poverty and maybe their mothers didn't feed them, they didn't get the right nutrition when they were growing up. So the first 1,000 days, 3 years old, you're not eating right, so your brain isn't formed as properly. So these are really serious issues that the fact that I have worked in agriculture, I'm now linking to everyday life as we all try to develop and truly scale up and do everything big in Africa.
So Rima, I want to come back to Rudy and your experience in increasing production, increasing yields. And obviously, aggregating has to be a big part of that, because suddenly you've got scale. With scale, you can approach a market, establish a market. Just talk us through Rudy's experience, or the experience that you have learned from Rudy.
My Rudy sisters are also sitting here, so when you have it up to the audience, or maybe after the session, they could also share some detailed insights. But I think the key is in organizing the women small farmers. And once you have organized this women small farmers, it gives you the advantage of economies of scale. It helps you to get licenses for certified seeds, and so we have our own seed banks. It gives you licenses to have your own fertilizer depots. So, you know, all the inputs that a farmer needs. We also have our own tools and equipments libraries, but one thing which is key is that we don't give anything free to the small farmers. Everything that the farmer needs, they need to buy. Initially, it could be at a token price, but then eventually, you know, once their productivity and yields of their farms increase. So we have our own testing laboratories. Every farmer maintains their own farmer's ledger and passbook of their own farms, so they can track year after year what were the input costs and what was the output, whether the input costs were increasing and whether the output was also increasing, reducing, what were the market prices. And I think that is making Rudy a very robust agribusiness company, which is owned and managed by the farmers themselves. And I think how Rudy could go to scale is, our experience has shown that it's women-to-women farmers learning and dialogue. When women farmers from one agroclimatic zone come and talk to the women farmers in the other agroclimatic zone, you know, the visits, the dialogues, the business, the best practices, the business ventures, the kind of investments which are needed, when they talk about it, they learn from each other, and that's how it goes to scale. I think there are a few key things that I thought which would be really helpful also for the women farmers in Africa based on our experiences. Because we have tried this out with farmers in Afghanistan, we have tried it out with farmers in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, in Bhutan, and in Myanmar. So what I want to propose is that you know, a collaborative learning in wiping out the adverse effects of droughts, or you know, increasing droughts, a vulnerability analysis of the different agroclimatic zones, and how can then the farmers themselves work on what are the resilient, you know, practices.
So Rima here, this is the knowledge, the upskilling of the farmers across the board.
Right.
And again, you've got to look to the mobile technology revolution, which is possibly Africa's biggest modern revolution, and access to information through that mechanism.
Very true, yeah.
So we've spoken about upskilling and using technology to do that.
Yeah, I was then referring to small demonstrative pilots, which, you know, serve as pilots, which then could convert into, so pilots on farm top renewables, and which could support agriculture.
So finance here from a solar perspective, and smaller solar equipment.
So agriculture and food processing together.
I'm coming back, but Florence has just brought up a very valuable point. She whispered in my ear that let's focus on this aggregation, the scale, which Rima, you've given us the starting point for. You know, not only have you got to create these collectives, but to the example on sorghum and establishing the market. So East African breweries was a starting point, and that negotiation, Florence, in the early stages needs to be taken care of by an angel at the end of the day. Can you tell me, take that sorghum experience?
I think the sorghum experience cuts across the board. There are learning areas here. and which are cross-cutting, whether it's sorghum, whether it's rice, whether it's wheat, any of these cereals, cross-cutting. Because many of these multinationals that are importing cereals, they have a very good, of course, their cream, and of course, it is genuine cream is based on, we can't find the volumes, we can't find the quality, we can't find timely delivery. And so we begin to take that head on, certainly with the mounting companies as well as other millers and so on, and targeting the very poor in the very, very rural area, in the semi-arid areas, where food age half the year, then normally the World Food Program heads there. And we decided first to ask our questions, let us just study the problem, and we realized the people can produce, but the productivity was very low, the price was very low, 5 shillings a kilo, and so on, which is far below. You need 10 shillings to be able to produce sustainably. And those negotiations for the price, we can't forget the price negotiations, because the price we allow, when you increase the resources to go, the money to go back to the farmer so they can access the finances and so on. So the price negotiation. And most important, what gave us a breakthrough is that at a particular time, and we decided that we need to take more than 1 year, 2 years to study and stabilize, we could actually predict that we can actually deliver this amount through now increased productivity. But most important is aggregation. Aggregation. In Africa, we are very strong on cooperative movement. And here I see actually something we can learn from you. You're actually using in India, you're using private sector company. It's a weak point in Africa which we could learn. How do you really turn these private sector companies? Now we developed a model of aggregation which supports both the marketing and the supply chain. And this aggregation helped, and we have several women, in fact women dominate this area. We supported them to go to the bank and access credit so that they're able to access inputs that helps them to actually aggregate, pay from the farmers, pay a good price, but deliver to the big millers. And these were ordinary women, but they turned out to be high entrepreneurs. And from there then, the youth found they can actually buy from these aggregators and head to chicken or poultry feed. So we have entrepreneurs from there doing their own businesses out of this. Because once you have the supply, the entrepreneurs come up. So not only have you been able to supply from literally zero to literally turn around the import, so all at once a big company that was actually importing is no longer importing because smallholder farmers through aggregation, quality assurance, the fact there's money, they supply money, credit, they can actually deliver timely. And they can deliver quality, and they can deliver large volumes as needed. So that's a really success story, which we can roll to other crops. And again, key is aggregation.
So have you got a microphone there? Yes, please go ahead. You could just state your name, where you're from, and deploy the question appropriately.
My name is Papa Cham, and I'm from Value Chain Development Company for Africa in Switzerland. I've been listening to all of you, and one thing has been resonating all along throughout all the speeches. From all your experiences has been about building an economic fabric around agriculture and led by women. I always attend women gatherings when people talk about women entrepreneurship as it is something different than any other type of entrepreneurship. No. Women are entrepreneurs by necessity in many developing countries because men have failed economic development, which made women to become entrepreneurs and feed their own family. The question is now, how are you going to scale it up? Transiting from informal women entrepreneurship to formal women entrepreneurship. I got it cut. By supporting women entrepreneurs, we are simply living up to our promises to do things by sense of purpose. So, my question is the following. From all the things you've described, it emerged invariably that where you've been successful, you've been able to access critical functions. One single entrepreneur in the small size cannot access by its own, but could be gut aggregation, syndication, provision of these type of services or minimum infrastructure platform down the value chain. So you are now a specific panel at the African Development Bank era. My question is that how are you going to manage to make sure to generate demand for interventions in specific segment of the value chains or clusters that are going to help you grow up your business and create shared prosperities, because inclusive growth takes place within the value chains, and we need to transform these prospective product lines into robust, integrative, and self-centered value chains in Africa. Thank you.
So, Ada, I'm going to come to you because we're in the process of, or you're in the process of, we're getting involved in your story now, of building out your business. You said you have got 5 stores, 5 outlets within the Nigerian region. And I suppose if I could rephrase the question, is how now do you attract enough investment, enough excitement around what you are doing to take that next stage, to become a key exporter, and maybe even to unlock intra-Africa trade? Appropriately rephrased? Thank you. Ada.
No, it's a very pertinent question, especially when you talk about entrepreneurs. The median capital available to male entrepreneurs is 2 times that available to women entrepreneurs like me. The stats, they show it. Research shows it. The data is clear. So we're already at a disadvantage. Talk less of me then going deeper into, I'm not just an entrepreneur, I'm an agripreneur. Yeah, I'm doing agriculture, one that hardly anyone wants to look at. So again, narrow space for me. And to scale up, the first thing is capital. I can't say it enough, and I know we've not talked about it enough here, but capital is king. Cash is king. So I'm excited when I hear about the African Development Bank putting money towards affirmative financing for women. I heard the example the senior vice president made when he said that the Tanzanian Development Bank was the first to access this, and they're going to deliberately give 70% on lending of the funds to women. But I want to even hear more about direct investments into women entrepreneurs in a big way. But scaling up, I was in Durban recently at the World Economic Forum, and people talked scale, and I had to actually ask them, can you define this for me? This scale, we all get so excited about scale. Oh, you have to scale. Oh, I'll go to a funder and they'll tell me, can it scale? What if I don't want to scale? What if I just want to focus, first of all, on building a quality, thank you, good business? First of all, get the operations right, get the value chain right, get the supply chain right first. Take my time to do that. If it takes 5 years, fine. But get it right, because I feel like we're pushing too many entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, to go too quickly, and they don't understand issues. So capital is one. A second issue is knowledge. So we don't understand it enough. Yana talked about training in business skills. Somebody said in another session about how, someone wants to be a mushroom farmer, and she's just like, her biggest challenge is that she doesn't know enough about it. So you need to create a network, and that's why even in Nigeria, I'm trying to set up what we call ladies in agribusiness. Ladies is intentional. Wearing our heels, yes. Going to the farm when we have to. Wearing our dresses and looking good, doing up our hair and our nails. But yes, we're ladies in agribusiness. It's very, very intentional. We have to build the networks, the collective, we have to share that knowledge and really share it with each other to grow together. So I think these are 2 big things, capital and then just that knowledge base. And I think a third one would be to have a seat on the table for decision making. We truly need to look at that and put ourselves out there, be it in government policy making, so that we're making deliberate efforts to change the narrative and direct financing and everything else towards women.
So just that element of having women at the table, creating the policies that impact women, it's that element of empathy, I think, that is needed in the decision-making process. Yeah. Florence, you wanted to add?
I just want to comment, just a little bit of addition, and really looking at your question. It's a very good question, because until we can look at the big picture and do what to do, there are cartels who import, for example, rice. They are not ready for people to break through. I mean, you can do small business, but you begin to deliver volumes that are going to stop a certain importer, you are now getting to the big boys fights. And that's why we need policy, policy change. And I don't think this, I've realized some of the press we are trying to break through, and then there's no competition with the importers, you're adding problems. So let us not ignore policy, and let's not ignore the big picture of where money goes. And there are also funders who will tell you, don't fund this because it really is our area. This is where we are exporting in Africa, so we don't want to block that. So if you're going to change the big picture, and I'm sure people who really want to change in big picture are fighting big battles. So we must realize there are policy issues, there are investment issues, and I will be really looking forward to this bank doing what they have told us, really putting dollars into women businesses, so that women business can stop being at the grassroots level at the breakthrough. Thank you.
So the affirmative action finance from the African Development Bank, that is up and running as one of the initiatives. Rima, you wanted to come in, and I'll come back to you, Ada.
I think to what the two sisters have been saying, there's so much of commonality, and I think when you were asking that how can women's tiny or micro businesses can go to scale, and the kind of investment that they need, the kind of access to finance they need, it's a blended finance. So it's an equity, it's a patient capital, it's a grant, and it's a loan. So it's a mixture of everything so that she can access the capacity building, she can avail of the technical services, she can try and, have her own learning from the market. We at SEVA call it as the Women's Livelihood Fund. So it's a mixture of a blended financing, and that enables the women's tiny enterprises to go to scale, so that then they are into the mainstream and able to then access, from the financial markets. So I think there's so much of commonality. I think we should really work on an MOU between the African Development Bank or SEVA and the Sisters Women Farmers of Africa to form a Women Farmers Association, which will enable women to have access to these livelihoods.
Now there we go. That's leadership, and that's solving the situation on the stage. Ada, you wanted to add?
I just wanted to quickly answer your question on scaling with regards to my firm. So we're only 2 years and 4 months old. So the first year we only just had, just our juice business, and it's in the last year and 4 months that we opened up 5 stores. So people look at me and like, Ada, 5 stores in just 14 months. We're opening up a 6th next month. And I'm like, yes. But the only reason why I could scale quickly is because I had a foundation in what it meant to do business. And that's when I go back to that issue of knowledge base, and do we set up a training school for women specifically in, something, and truly be very targeted, because I can do it comfortably because I know what needs to be done to build a business. So, yeah.
Jana, before we go to the next question, I do just want to get, because you came to this panel with the intention of talking about access to finance. So I definitely want you to come in here and perhaps just weigh in with your experience.
Well, just a brief word to say, often when access to finance is explored, it's not explored with respect to women farmers or agripreneurs in the full extent of its potential. So what I mean is not just grants, not just small loans, but targeting women in agribusiness for long-term patient debt capital, which acts in a similar form as equity, looking to their businesses to take quasi-equity or equity positions. The access to finance issue for women agricultural entrepreneurs Ada actually said it very right. You're already at a disadvantage because you're coming from the agri sector, which is seen as high risk. Whether it is or not is a different question. And number two, every bit of data from Silicon Valley through to the Antarctica demonstrates that a woman going in to pitch for any form of meaningful funding, angel investing, venture capital, private equity, or otherwise, is hugely disadvantaged, often on a subconscious level, unfortunately, so no ill intent necessarily, but you are therefore, there's 2 X's as you enter the room before you've even opened your mouth to say, here's my business plan. So what I would envision and where I think we can support is something we haven't talked about necessarily as much today, but business development services that support women agripreneurs in accessing large pools of capital. So I often work with women entrepreneurs or networks thereof to help them with the business planning, with the pitch, with the marketing and all of these things to enable them to break through both the subconscious and the conscious barriers to securing large amounts of capital as a woman agribusiness owner.
So part of the reason that Africa has come to India and kind of vice versa is that we want to learn from each other. And there's a whole discussion going on here around scale. So I think it's important to point out that if you ranked the top dozen scale opportunities in the world, which we've done, 6 of them originate in India. One of them is sitting on the dice, that's Seva. You actually need Sevas at the 200,000 farmer level in almost every state in India. So that would be another, Rima, what would you say, 15, 16, 20 states? That's the impact of scale. If Rima's and Seva's ability to avoid the scale necessities of investment bankers and investors by pulling together all of the resources necessary to scale without them could be then leveraged across those other 20 states, you would have a massive, massive positive impact on India. Now, it turns out in the dairy industry, that's already happened in India. It's a $3 billion business. It's thousands of farmer-owned producer cooperatives, much the way Rima described, that own the dairy business in India and with a professional management layer deliver it without traditional investors, the way we would think of them from the north. So what's happening, I would suggest, in Africa is there's a lot of global north investment models being foisted on a continent which really needs a Seva type approach, or needs an Akshaya Patra type approach, which serves 1.4 million school lunches to kids every day, using the agricultural capacity of India. They're about to scale up to 5 million kids a day, and they're going to do that over about 7 years, which is mind-boggling when you think about it. And everyone should go to an Akshaya Patra kitchen and have that experience, because that's where you see scale. 1.4 million lunches each day going to 5 million lunches each day. Again, in South Africa, they produced a report after 10 years of experimenting with school lunches. They reported that they'd wasted $3 billion. They'd done the traditional, let's hire the private sector through a contracting process to deliver lunches. Total failure. Wasted $3 billion. An entire country of children didn't get their lunches, but a bunch of contractors got their money. So the ability to scale correctly, which is almost never the global north approach applied in the South, It's always the South approach created and scaled South to South is absolutely critical. And I would love to hear the comments of all of you on that thesis.
So I think, thank you very much for that. Very, very valuable contribution. And perhaps I'm going to add to that, and I'm going to come back to you, Rima, and say that we're always trying to reinvent the model. And as you say, you've pointed to SEWA being a robust, viable model that actually could be expanded across India. But all the lessons that you've already learned, we could actually take the module and deploy it in Africa. Is it as easy as it sounds, and why haven't we done it?
We very strongly believe and have faith and trust in women-to-women learning. And I think when it's women to women, when I feel that, oh, she's also a small farmer, and if she's able to turn her farm into an enterprise, if she's able to buy shares in her company, I could also do that. And it's learning by seeing, and that's what then one starts believing in too. And, but I would like to just say here that yes, you could take the model, but it's a process. It cannot be fitted into a project cycle. It has to go at the pace of the women in Africa. And I think that process, one needs to invest time and resources into that. And that's where I was talking about that livelihood fund, which would look at the whole holistic approach at the pace at which the women farmers need it. And
so time is not on our hands. And Jana, come in here in terms of the comment that you wanted to make, one with regard to replicating the model and how viable that is, and even navigating ourselves around the traditional financing mechanisms as was suggested by the gentleman, and actually just relying on that network to generate the viable business model.
Using the South Africa lunch distribution failure, we often think that private sector organizations are somehow more efficient or effective than social enterprises. And that's just a fallacy. Often using a social enterprise and thinking about them as a channel or distribution partner could actually be immensely powerful. So those are two of the things, the power of the social enterprise and in fact of demand-driven, self-driven models as really being key elements to scale.
I think our experience has shown that scaling up happens only when there's a strong sense of belongingness and a strong sense of ownership. When the women farmers themselves start owning their own enterprises, their own company, then the scaling up. And I very much agree and endorse that, it has to be owned and managed by the women themselves. There cannot be a blueprint which you can thrust upon. So.
Great. Florence.
Yeah, I think I agree on the fact that we can't take models from north to the south. That's truly the failure in South Africa, and there could be others we are not aware of. But this transfer of knowledge and technology across Asia to Africa as a model, I would really be very cautious about it for exactly what we have said. The culture, but they are learnings. We can learn from each other other than say we're just gonna, because we have been trying to, from Africa to talk about taking the Asian green revolution to Africa for 50 years. It hasn't happened. And the question is, because we have been thinking we can cut and paste, but the situation is different, the food crops are different, many things are different. Plus Asia is one country, India is one country, Africa, there are many different countries. But having said that, there is a revolution going on in Africa, and we need to build on it. It's the cell phone revolution. It is the use of cell phone to deliver cash, to generate connectivity, and really we can build on that. We can scale up. I've seen the power of ICT, the power of cell phone in the hands of women, and the power of cell phone really to transfer cash. In our own experience in Africa Harvest, we're taking far much less dollars to do what we used to do several years ago when we didn't have this connectivity. Farmers are trading with each other and they don't even know each other. Before, people used just to trade people they can see. We are no longer doing that. And so I think the Africa Revolution or the Africa Scaling Up, we need to learn from Asia, but it's going to be based on, I think, different strength, the cooperative, the willing to trade together, the use of mobile cell phone, and so on. And so I think it has to be a very different development, and it's beginning to happen. But there's still a lot we can learn from each other. So I agree.
We need so much more time for the conversation, and I am going to take that one last question. Is it a question, statement?
My name is Lillian Best, and I'm from Liberia. And as the daughter of a new farmer who is actually a journalist, and she thinks I'm her venture capitalist, because my salary is her salary. I wanted to know, you've all talked a lot about agency and access to it. I know I heard Yana talk about access to agency, and also I think Ada talking about the need to have a seat at the table. And I wanted to hear what all you all have to say about sort of, how you've all been able to achieve that in your own ways, because there's so many areas in which women need support, and especially women agricultures. To point to Liberia's own, experience, women were indeed the largest share of the food producers before the war. And then after the war, you see a drastic fall in their impact in that sector, and therefore a drastic fall in production in that sector. And the men have not come in to fill that gap. And the reason why you have that gap is because of fistula, for example. Women are too sick to do as much as they could in the farms. They don't have access to so many other resources. And so you start thinking that women not only need access to capital and information about how to run their farms, they need health care. And so there's so much sort of empty space, or that gap between women's needs and what they have access to. And while we need the money, we also need the voice. And we've seen the power of a woman's voice in terms of just political agents, raw political agency, because the same Liberian women were the ones who said, "You're my husband, I'm not gonna have sex with you until you get out there and say no to this war."
So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to come in here.
Yes,
I love where you're going.
Yes.
But I'm going to give you something that I don't often do, and that is the power to ask and to rephrase your question as the concluding question for each panelist to comment on. Now that's a lot of power. Not many moderators do that.
How have you all been able to, and how do you plan to sort of use your power and your space to achieve that, to help other women achieve that sort of political agency to get the support that they need?
Very well done. In fact, I think my job may be in jeopardy. Right, so Rima, could we start with you? And we'll bring it through to Florence. And ladies, your concluding comments with regards to that very well asked question.
Well, we at SEWA very much believe in women-to-women sisterhood and solidarity. And I think it's that sisterhood and solidarity, and that's what gives us, gives the women the voice. That when her work was not even counted as work, when a woman was not even considered to be a farmer, now she has her own agribusiness company, and not of a few hundred, but 200,000 farmers. So I think that is what at SEWA we always believe in. And I really wanted to say one sentence, and this is, at SEWA we always say that we shall overcome someday. So that's what we always very firmly believe in, that it is we, the women, together, collectively, we shall overcome and in our fight against poverty.
Very well said. Yana.
Personally, I think I benefited from a certain naivete, which is I didn't know often that it was inappropriate or unacceptable or somehow very brave, quote unquote, to go for the things that interested me in life. I often say I didn't know what I didn't know, and I'm glad for that. So now the advice that I give young women that I work with or come across is if they say, you know, why should I do X? How could I possibly be qualified, et cetera, my encouragement to them is always, why not? And I think I try to take that perspective into everything I do, actually. And as a woman, I do believe that we have some inclinations towards second-guessing ourselves a bit more, into doubting ourselves. And so when I hear any young female entrepreneur or otherwise say, you know, why or how or should I encourage them to rephrase as why not. And then in terms of going forward into the future, there are two things I aspire to. One is that I personally didn't have. I worked with some wonderful women, but I wouldn't say I had many mentors, actually male or female. So I aspire to make time for active mentorship myself, because I think it's really vital. And then number two is no matter where else my work takes me, continuing to always make sure that a piece of my portfolio actively focuses on women and girls' empowerment. It's both the sort of professional and personal way in which I hope to continue to make a difference.
Ada.
I think for me, there are two things that have helped me over my career as a woman. And I think the two things are, one is knowledge, and the second is strong networks. I'm not a rich person, but I know that I've been able to build my business in the last 2 years just by having a solid network base of people I can call on to help, support, open doors, have meetings. And on the knowledge component, I still think about, oh my gosh, I spent 4 years in a very, very masculine environment working in the government of Nigeria. And I'm there, this young single woman walking around with the Minister of Agriculture in a room filled with 50 men, and he's saying that's my senior investment advisor. And for me, instead of them looking at you as an object of, you know, something else, but it's really the fact that when I could open my mouth with confidence and speak with knowledge, that truly is what helped help me go through a lot of things. So as I think exactly what Yana says, I try to do the same for others. I respond to DMs on my Instagram, to messages, emails that come from young women every day asking for mentorship or just can you introduce me to someone who can help? And of course, what we're trying to do with the Association of Women in Agribusiness or Ladies in Agribusiness, I think it's critical to share the knowledge through business development support services as well as through the network in a big way. Yeah.
Florence.
Yeah, I think, I don't know much about the women who are here, but the commitment to change the situation where I come from my own background, which I'll see in 1 second, coming from a very, very poor background in the rural area where we used to have 1 meal a day or none. And by grace of God, having excelled in science and education and feeling totally committed that no matter what little I can do, I must be committed to changing that. And I think women have to a point where they are committed to seeing the other fellow women suffer and say, I'll do something. Whether it's in a business, whether it's in exactly being in a big company, but saying, I'm going to carve this niche and touch women, or the big leadership SAWA is doing to millions of women. Africa Harvest, the organization where I'm a founder as well as a director, there's now an international organization, is targeting 10 countries, or as many countries in Africa as we can, sharing our knowledge, our model development, and literally targeting women and girls. I'm being fully persuaded that if we're going to change the situation in Africa, women cannot afford to be left behind. They have to be part and parcel of playing the role. And by the way, it's not just in agriculture, in policy, in agribusiness, entrepreneurship, in all the areas. And so I think each one of women, you included, I'm sure, there's a lot you are praying. Let us take that commitment. And let's not say we shall exclude our boys because we are mothers as well, to the boys as well. But realize that the women have been left behind in so many ways. And unless we can commit ourselves, and I believe many of the men here are still committed to supporting women. And so we should have a personal commitment. I am personally fully persuaded that every institution I'm involved, I target 60%. I really try to turn the balance. Sometimes they say the gender is supposed to be 30% in my own country. I say, why can it be 30% men and 60% women? Instead of it being 30, which is 30, normally when you hear men say 30, they mean women 30, men 60 or so. And so it's a personal commitment, but clearly looking at areas where there are barriers and bottlenecks and supporting women. And agriculture is my passion. Thank you.
I think a round of applause to everybody for sharing their energy, their passion, their knowledge, and hopefully the voices on this platform can continue to shape African agriculture for women agripreneurs.